Hello, my name is Olu Osha. I like talking about American presidents. Today, I want to discuss the uh, the political parties in the 20th century. So, of course, by the tail end of the 20th century and the beginning of the 20th century, our political uh, system had uh, crystallized into a very strong two-party system. That's the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. Of course, for a while, the Republican Party was stronger. Now, I'm going to discuss the contending issues, but let me start with the monetary policy, which divided the two parties. So, in 1896 uh, the issue of the gold standard was uh, was the issue was a polarizing issue in the elections of 1896, and of course, while the Democratic standard bearer William Jennings Bryan had used an imagery of the cross of gold, uh, he still lost to the Republican standard bearer William McKinley. Remember, William McKinley had been the tariffs man, and of course, when he was a congressman, he was known as a tariffs man. And now this time, he was advocating the gold standard as the single species for us to use, as opposed to what Democrats wanted. Democrats wanted bimetallism, to have gold and silver as specie, because if they had gold and silver, it would allow unlimited coinage of silver, which would increase the money supply. Uh, Southerners, farmers, and miners wanted this. Of course, that's the Democratic Party. They wanted this because it would cause inflation, right? Uh, if they could have an unlimited coinage of silver, it would cause inflation, and it would make it easy for them to be able to repay their loans and their debts. However, uh, the business interests and the bankers in who uh, you know were the mainstay of the Republican Party, they preferred the gold standard because the gold standard was viewed as stimulating in international trade, and that it was more stable. Right, the gold standard was more stable. Now, a feature of the gold standard was that you could that the currency was pegged to a fixed gold amount, right? The currency was pegged to a fixed gold amount, and of course, bankers wanted this. The business owners wanted this. So this was the dividing issue. Uh, William McKinley would win the elections of 1896, and of course, he was assassinated, and his vice president Teddy Roosevelt would take over. So uh, the monetary policy, of course, eventually, I'm going to try and finish with the monetary policy first, and then I'll talk about the socio-cultural issues that were dividing the two parties. So the monetary policy would the gold standard would be the mainstay until the Great Depression. The Great Depression saw the exit of the loss of the Republican Party, Herbert Hoover, and of course, Herbert Hoover was president during the Great Depression, and of course, Franklin D. Roosevelt, took office, and then he would go on to ban the individual ownership of gold in various forms, including gold coins, gold certificates, or gold bullion. So the idea was to have American citizens who held gold to deliver all their gold to the Federal Reserve. So the Federal Reserve now uh, were the only ones who could uh, uh, hold on to gold. This, of course, allowed the federal government to be able to control the currency and the economy. It also allowed FDR, that's Franklin D. Roosevelt, to be able to fund his New Deal programs, right? His New Deal programs to be able to tackle the Great Depression. And so there are lots of programs that that were funded by the federal government. So it expanded the federal government as well. His New Deal programs expanded the federal government. Uh, so I'm going to get into to their ideologies, but let me finish up with the gold and the gold and monetary policy. So, in 1934, FDR would pass the Gold Reserve Act, and of course, again, that made it illegal for citizens to hold on to gold. They had to deliver all their gold to the Federal Reserve. This would be the law. It would be in effect until 1974, when Gerald Ford was president, and he would sign the Gold Ownership Act in 1974, and this allowed Americans to be able to own and invest in gold again. So it allowed private ownership and investment in gold. This was in 1974, signed by Gerald Ford. So we see that from for about 40 years, only the Federal Reserve could hold on to gold, and it allowed the expansion of the federal government, allowed the federal government to control the economy more and be able to aggressively deal with the Great Depression. Now, other issues that divided the Republican and the Democratic Party uh, were the was the issue of industrialization, right? The industrialization uh, at the end of the 19th century created a great wealth gap, wealth disparities. It meant there was a select few uh, Americans who were extremely, enormously wealthy, and there was a working class who had very unsafe working conditions. And so there was a progressive era. The progressive era, there were progressives in the Republican and the Democratic Party. So you see, there's progressives, the Republican uh, uh, the the element of the Republican Party that were progressives were Teddy Roosevelt, right? So they were dealing with the fallout of industrialization, right? The side effects of industrialization, such as like the urban uh, urban crisis, the population growth, the poor labor conditions, the pollution that was coming about as a result of industrialization, the wealth disparities, dealing with safe working conditions, workers' rights. So those were progressive issues. Now, eventually, after FDR, sorry, after Teddy Roosevelt and William, his former protege and now President William Howard Taft, fell out, and consequently, the Democratic candidate Woodrow Wilson would become president. Woodrow Wilson would now be the champion of the progressive cause, and he started to initiate welfare programs. Now, he passed with the passing of the 16th Amendment in 1913. It meant that uh, the Democratic Party, right, the government was able to tax the wealthy at a very high rate. So the highest marginal tax rate was 91%. And so the government was now going to use federal income tax. The 16th Amendment introduced the federal income tax, right? It made it law. It was now constitutional, right? It was now in our constitution. So instead of using tariffs, remember, Republicans were high on tariffs. They liked the high tariffs, and tariffs, were taxing foreign goods, but there was always retaliatory consequences, and it caused retaliation against agricultural products in the South. And remember, a lot of the Democratic Party party members in the South were farmers, and so there was an adverse impact from retaliatory tariffs on their goods, their agricultural products. So when Woodrow Wilson introduced the federal income tax, and they were able to now tax the wealthy at a very high tax rate. The highest marginal tax rate was 91%. Of course, there was a war, the First World War going on then at the time. It also allowed the federal government to expand. So They expanded dramatically. Now, when the Republicans came back into power with Warren G. Harding, Calvin Coolidge, and Herbert Hoover, the Republicans now started to follow neoliberal principles. No, neoliberal principles hadn't yet come in. That would be in the mid 20th century. But they started to follow, under the Secretary of the Treasury, what was called the scientific taxation. And so the notion that if they taxes, reduced taxes on the wealthy dramatically, the wealthy would be able to invest in businesses, and it will stimulate the economy and even generate more tax revenues. And this happened. Unfortunately, when this was effected, the wealthy just ended up investing a lot in the stock market, and there was a very high speculation in the stock market, which ended up in the crash of the stock market in 1929 and the subsequent Great Depression. So, of course, the Republican Party then had to exit, and in came the Democratic Party and the New Deal policies of uh, FDR, Franklin D. Roosevelt. So, and now with the New Deal policies of FDR, because initially Herbert Hoover and the Republicans, they wanted a limited uh, size of the federal government. They wanted deregulation, right? They wanted deregulation. They wanted limited government interference in the market. So, in fact, when the Great Depression came about, Herbert Hoover wouldn't do anything, right? He would, because he felt that it wasn't the federal government's job to intervene and create jobs and help to address the unemployment and uh, have the federal government intervene in addressing the economic depression. However, again, when FDR came into power with his New Deal programs, he 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 infused massive government intervention in the economy, and it was successful in dealing with the Great Depression. And there was a lot of regulation. He created the Securities and Exchange Commission. So the federal government under the Democrats, uh, you know, expanded. The federal government expanded significantly. Huge government programs, welfare programs, social security, and so you see a feature of the Democratic Party was a greater government intervention to create general welfare for the people, to address social ills on behalf of the people, and of course social justice. And so working class people, a lot of farmers and minorities, African Americans, they found a home in the Democratic Party under FDR's policies. Uh, so, as a as a consequence of the failures of the classical liberal policies of the Republican parties, especially as executed by Andrew Mellon when he was Secretary of the Treasury, the Republican Party would now consequently come up with these neoliberal policies. And neoliberalism, again, I've talked about neoliberalism before. What neoliberalism basically espouses is limited government intervention in the economy, and to let market forces to prevail in the economy, a small government, and you know, and it advocates individual responsibility, that individuals are responsible for their failures or their successes. So this was what the Republican Party was now advocating. This was what they were postulating as a platform, based on these neoliberal policies. And we see that this went on until the 1960s. Now, the 1960s, they were now shifting tides as the Democratic Party under Lyndon B. Johnson would now start to champion civil rights and social justice, especially on behalf of minorities, with the passing of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and so there would be a shift, uh, a seismic shift with uh, African Americans moving from the party of Lincoln, that's the Republicans, into the Democratic Party. Now, of course, Southern whites who were now being quoted by Republicans, uh, would now move over to the Republican Party. The Republican Party by this time was now espousing neoliberal policies, which I just described. In addition to, it would become more of a religious platform, right? They would now champion a more religious, moralistic platform. They would be against abortion, right? They would be against abortion. They would and advocate individual responsibility. So this was now the what the Republican Party was now championing, and so Southern whites, rural whites, now moved over to the Republican Party more, especially in the 60s and 70s, and that's the way it is today. Of course, in addition, the Republican Party also started to advocate focus on national defense and growing militarization of the police with law and order policies, and while the Democratic Party started to champion social justice uh, and civil rights and environmental protection as well. So basically, and so since the 60s, uh, you know, basically the Republican and Democratic Party, they've remained the same since about the 70s, with a switch, and so that's what we have today. We find that the Republican Party, they're focused on anti-abortion, they're more moralistic, focusing on religious themes, individual responsibility, neoliberalism. Like I said, neoliberalism is the focus on privatization of public services, right? That the government shouldn't get involved in providing public services, but that private individuals and businesses and organizations should take care of public services, and individuals be able to uh, be able to pursue and accomplish, their goals and their success, right? And advocating more of individual responsibility, while the Democratic Party, of course, focuses on abortion rights, rights of minorities, including gay marriage, and they call it the big umbrella: social justice, civil rights issues, environmental conservation, and you'll also notice, just because of the more progressive platform, the Democratic Party today sort of has more highly educated people than the Republican Party, which has a very large rural base in the South. Well, let me stop here, and I hope I've been able to bring home the dichotomy and just paint the pictures the Democratic and Republican Party has evolved over the ages since the inception of our democracy. I did an earlier video about the evolution of the parties in the 19th century. My name is Olu Osha. I like to talk about American presidents, and I also talk about, I draw attention also to color of law violations, uh, pivoting on subordination of perjury and fraud on the court, which I'm experiencing in Montgomery County, Maryland, intended to obstruct justice in the federal government. I was a federal government employee as of May 16, 2023, when I was swatted. And false charges were filed against me in Montgomery County, and I was framed by Montgomery County Police, including a Jeffrey Ray who shot me in the head, tasered me, and a Demarcus Coleman filed false charges against me, and a Sergeant Charles Drengwitz of Montgomery County Police These people filed false charges after GD Wire was suborned to commit perjury on an emergency evaluation petition. Everything he wrote was a fabrication, and I've been denied justice, and I'm still seeking justice. I'll keep you posted. Thank you.